You're listening to the MoneyWeb SAFM Market Update Podcast.
And this segment is brought to you by Alan Gray, long-term investing. Now, as we emerge from this pandemic and grapple with the aftermath of both the health crisis and the responses by government to combat it, it feels increasingly difficult for investors to connect the dots between what has happened and how to invest now for what the future may hold. So we're thinking about how to think about investing in this particular environment. And to unpack this, I'm joined by Taryn Lamb, who's the head of retail distribution at Alan Gray. Tamron, many thanks for your time this evening. And I suppose that is the big question. You know, our economy has taken a huge knock because of the pandemic and all that it's brought with it. Are there any green shoots of hope when we are exploring these investment avenues?
Well, firstly, hi there, and thanks very much for having me on the slot. So, yeah, that's a great question, and it really feels like it's top of mind for so many South African investors. And I'll answer it with a quick first yes, there are some green shoots of hope. And firstly, look, the SA economy has been recovering. It's been gradual, and it actually had a big setback in June and July as a result of the unrest and the third COVID wave. But we've had a great commodity boom, which has supported mining, which is a massively important sector for us. And we've had an excellent agricultural season. And all of this has meant tax collections have surprised positively, the deficit's reduced a little bit. And really, we've got a positive global backdrop. And if travel restrictions continue to ease, that should be a nice environment for export revenues and stronger growth. But really, I think the big but is just that people still feel negative because they are worried about the sort of serious skills shortage in the public sector and concerned the government hasn't been able to reverse the stagnation and corruption we saw in previous administrations.
Yeah, and I'm glad you bring up that consumer and business confidence because it plays a very important role when we speak about investment, and just that link between the context of our current economic environment and really the investments that people would be looking to make within this environment as it currently looks. Is there a link there?
Look, there absolutely is a link. And we can't, as investors, we can't pretend that we operate in this beautiful vacuum, which is, neatly insulated from our environment. And ultimately, we are price takers. But I do think that it's important for investors to separate between the environment and the prices that you pay for assets that you purchase in that environment. So actually, if the value of the assets we invest in, have been negatively impacted by a tough economy, but sentiment is low and those assets are already pricing in the bad news, they can actually be fantastic investment opportunities and generate great returns going forward.
So now that we've created that context in terms of the economic environment and whether or not there are some green shoots, what are the key risks that you should be thinking about when you are putting together an investment portfolio?
Yeah, now it's a very broad question, and I think those risks can change over time, and obviously it all pertains to, don't overpay for assets. So I've spoken already about the SA context, but so maybe I'll try and talk about two other risks that we're thinking about at the moment, and they're quite broad themes. But the one is that there has been an unprecedented level of monetary and fiscal easing by developed governments across the world, and that's created distortions in certain parts of the market, but both in bond and in equity markets. So that's the one thing just to be very mindful of. And the second is that we've seen a continuation of certain trends, and we sort of almost in this environment at the moment where people believe that what's worked over the last 10 years is just going to continue to work. And examples of this are investing in high growth, technology companies that are at the head of their game. And those have been great businesses. But it's important to remember that themes last for a long time until they don't. So those are the sort of two themes that we're thinking of at the moment, in addition to the others I mentioned.
Yeah, and that would link into being a responsible investor, because you have to strike a balance between the traditional stocks that you would invest in and these tech stocks that you've spoken about, which are all the rage at the moment, but also very volatile. So you would have to be very responsible in the way that you enter the market.
Yeah, that's very true. And, people have got very different definitions of responsible investing. And being a responsible investor, I mean, first of all, it's being responsible about your own decisions, making sure that you're making investment decisions that are in line with your own long-term plan and not getting caught up by the emotions. The other part of responsible investing is actually how do you think about your role in influencing that business's operations. I mean, ultimately, if you buy a share, you've got an ownership stake in a business, and a responsible investor probably wants to ensure that that business is operating in a sustainable way. And sustainable doesn't just mean, can that business continue to be profitable and very competitive or doing a great job for customers? It's actually incorporating other dimensions. So is the business operating unsustainably when it comes to the environment? Does it have a culture of good governance? What's its impact on society? And people often refer to these responsible investing factors as ESG, and sometimes they almost put it separate to their decision to invest. But actually, we think it should be a core part of, whether or not you think the business can be sustainable over the longer term, and therefore a key part of your sort of investment process and your investment decision-making framework.
Right, and there's obviously a lot more to talk about, and I actually wanted to pick your brain before you tell us where potential investors can get more detail. Just adding on to this responsible investor meaning, the differentiation between short-term investments and long-term investments. I had a friend who, for example, asked me, hey, I want to invest, but I want to do it aggressively. I want to get those returns now. And I'm not sure that that's always the wise way to go.
Yeah, it isn't always the wise way to go, because unfortunately you have a very low level of predictability on short-term price movements. And so when we think about long-term, you're buying an investment in either a company or a property, and ultimately you want that price to be well below the actual value of the investment, or the true value of the investment. And actually, in the short term, that price goes up and down just depending on what people feel, sentiment and broader kind of the environment, negativity or positivity. In the long term, we think that price actually edges towards the real value of the investment. And so you've got a much greater chance of achieving those longer term returns, which are then in line with the goals that you set. So do I want to retire with X amount? Do I want to save for my child's education? And so it's a matching of your long-term goals relative to what investments you make that we think has proved to be much more successful and sustainable strategy longer term.
And then just very briefly, where can potential or interested investors get more information?
Yeah, so there are a couple of places, obviously on the Allan Gray website, allengray.co.za, but also we just recently held an event for clients and advisors, and on that website we've actually put a lot of content, that was discussed at that summit, and it's called investmentsummit.co.za. So if anyone's interested, a lot of these topics were discussed by a range of fund management companies, including ourselves.
Very interesting insights. Tamarin Lamb, many thanks for your time this evening. She's the head of retail distribution at Allan Gray, and that segment was brought to you by Allan Gray, long-term investing.
You've been listening to another MoneyWeb SAFM Market Update podcast, uploaded weekdays at 7 p.m. For more MoneyWeb podcasts, go to moneyweb.co.za or the app, and follow MoneyWeb News for daily updates.